Hi everyone, this is Jonta from IAL. I hope you can hear me. Thank you so much for sparing your evening with us to learn new things. Really appreciate it. Yes, you're going to spare 2 hours of your dinner time. I see some people still driving home. I really appreciate that. And before we jump into the session, let me just introduce Mr. Bryan, who will be speaking today. Mr. Bryan himself has been with the IAL for quite some time. He's currently a special adult educator at IAL, specialist adult educator at IAL. He previously has extensive experiences in facilitation, corporate training, coaching, as well as consulting and courseware design. He has conducted training over 15 countries, so he's quite a good some person to talk about culture and then like having designing your collaboration or and so that you receive consistent result from all cultures. He'll be sharing about best practices in online training and engagements. So this session will be recorded. There will be a highlights posted on IO website. Just to give you guys a heads up that this session will be recorded. Mr. Bryan, I'll pass the time to you.
Thank you, Jonta. Thank you so much. All right. Very good evening to all of you. Welcome to the session for this evening. What I'm going to do is I'm going to just push out a Nearpod link for us. Just give us a while. There are still people logging in at this point in time. You can access my Nearpod lesson via the code that I'm pushing out under the chat function. So we're going to get started, and it would be great if different ones of you could actually start your video so that we can put some faces to your name. That would really be great. Thank you so much. Different ones of you. Thank you so much. Now we're going to get started, and thank you for spending this evening with me for the next 1 hour, 58 minutes. So just give me a while. All right, good. Now, if you are all right, let's get started because we only have about 2 hours of session for this session for today. Now, the topic of our interest is basically to master the keys to better online training as far as engagement. And thank you, Jonta, for introducing me. I've done training in 15 different countries. These are my credentials. I've been with Institute for Adult Learning for about 8 years right now, teaching a series of different courses, and it's a privilege to conduct some form of a workshop for all of us this evening. Now, I want to just share with us, even before we get into our actual lesson for today, that education is not about the filling of a pail, which means it's not just about downloading content, but the lighting of a fire, lighting of passion for learning, and at the same time, inspiring different learners to want to learn more. So as we get going, I want to share with you in the next about 3 minutes some of the survey that have been taken place since September 2020 by IAL. And if you take a look at my slides, I know that a number of us have just logged in. So allow me to just push out the Nearpod slides via the chat function once again. All right. So take a look here. IAL conducted a series of survey among different adult educators in September 2020. And they have concluded, if you take a look at my slide itself, it says this: virtual learning is the new norm in both higher education as well as adult learning. So allow me to share with you some of the basic findings of this survey before we get going. And it says this: at the onset of COVID-19 pandemic, 4 times as many respondents reported frequent use of online platforms for teaching, assessment, and training as compared to pre-COVID use. So this is something that is very important for us to take note, and I believe that this is the new norm moving forward. And if you take a look here on my slides itself, all right, synchronous learning platforms were mainly used more frequently during the COVID-19 situation as compared to the pre-recorded video 2 years ago. Now, with Institute for Adult Learning, I've been conducting training on online learning for about 5 years right now. And in the earlier years, especially from 2016, 17 onwards, there wasn't so much of a picked up rate. And in fact, a lot of people will say to us saying Singapore is so small And you know what? If you want to have meetings or training, nobody will go for the video conferencing platform. But as far back as there about 4 years ago, we've gotten the directive from WDA back then that by 2020, we're going to see a lot more usage of video conferencing platforms. So with that, you will also realize this, that 71% of the respondents agree that online teaching, learning, assessment is the future of higher education, adult training, as well as lifelong learning itself. Okay, so let's get going, and then we're going to have you set some agenda for our session for today. And out of which, take a look here, do a bit of a comparison between the statistics that is mentioned here. 76% felt that the move towards online learning would positively impact the online learning program enrollment, whereas 46% felt that if we were to swing entirely towards online learning alone, it will negatively impact the campus or center-based program enrollment. Now, you and I, we all know that because of COVID-19, most of the organizations and us as trainers had no choice but to get into it. But take a look here on the impact. 80% felt that online learning would actually help learners develop digital skills. And from my experience in conducting training over the past 1.5 years, especially after COVID-19, a lot more people are at least more exposed to the usage of Zoom and technology for learning. Whereas 58% felt that online learning would actually equip them with the necessary skills and knowledge for employment. Okay, good. Thank you so much. And let's get going. Now, and this was one of the survey that was basically being done. And I just want to draw your attention to this particular point, that we have to come to that place to realize that this will be the new norm. Even when COVID-19 circuit breaker measures have been totally lifted in the future, I believe, and a lot of training providers do believe, that there will still be a certain percentage of online learning, whether synchronous through video conferencing platforms or asynchronous at the same time. But I've got a question for all of us. With all these different things, there is a huge but. And what is the but? The reality is this: the survey reports for us there are different forms of challenges in the transition towards online learning. The first thing that we look into will be literally the issues of access, connectability, and the reliability of technology tools. Next, we do face learners and even participants having insufficient digital skills. Lots of the learners who have actually participated in the survey complain that there is a lack of social interaction. And the next aspect that we're looking at is basically the difficulty in sustaining learner engagement, and finally, a lack of mental readiness as well as mindset. Now, for the purpose of our workshop for today, we want to focus on these two aspects that I am actually focusing on right now, putting a star on it: the lack of social interaction as well as the difficulty in sustaining learners' engagement. So what I want us to do right now is allow me some time to just push out, just give me a while first. I noted that a number of you have actually gone in, just log in. So let me just push out the nearport code once again for different ones of us. So for the next session of 1 hour and there about 15 minutes, what I hope to accomplish with different ones of us is to look into discovering some form of a tips and tricks in boosting your confidence and improving clarity in delivering online sessions, particularly as we look into learners coming from varied backgrounds. And we also want to examine what are some of the common pitfalls to avoid in online engagement. So allow me to introduce the session and the agenda for today. So this is the welcome. And right after this introduction, what I want us to do is we're going to do a bit of a brainstorming on the common challenges and the pitfalls during online training. Next up, we're going to look into altogether 3 key principles plus 4 applications for you to look into the principles of learning engagement. And hopefully we will have some time for Q&A, and we will end our session promptly at about 9 a.m. So before we get going, allow me sometimes to do the administrative briefing itself. So take a look here. What I want us to do is this. If you can access the Nearport code, and I'd like to invite as many ones of you to turn on your video as possible, because later on we're going to assign you to your respective small groups. Could you get into your Nearport itself that I've just pushed out and help me out by listing down what are some of your learning expectations for tonight's session? Can I give you, say there, about 1 or 2 minutes to key in? So for those of you who are using Nearport for the very first time, it is actually very simple. Once you have logged onto the URL, what I need you to do is put down your name, and literally you will see this particular interface. So all you need to do is literally to just, thank you, different ones of you, go under this segment, click your thoughts, notice that there is only a 250 words count, and then post it. That's all. So can I give us, say there, about maybe 1 minute to work on this? Thank you so much. Right, so let me just show you what are some of the technology tools that we can actually utilize. Now, today's session is not to teach you on how to use Nearport. In the other sessions that I've conducted last year with a group of people coming in from different parts of Singapore, I was using Pear Deck as a form of a technology to push out all of my learning activities. What I hope to do is, besides covering some of the principles, getting you into small group discussion, it will be great for me to do a bit of a demonstration to allow you to see how technology can be woven into our lesson plan to engage our learners very intentionally. So let's take a look. Thank you, Z. Thank you, Gerald, Sharon, Euro, Veron, Cheryl, and different ones of you. So let's take a look. A lot of you want to talk about the engagements in terms of the virtual software. And then some of you say, so you want to learn about diverse participants, while others will say, how do you conduct a technical topic in an engaging manner? Now, what I want to do is this. I will try to cover all of our sessions. So Miti just talked about learning new platforms. Unfortunately for today, I will only be exposing you to Nearport. But during the Q&A session, different ones of you, feel free to ask me the different kinds of tools I use in my training session itself, all right? So this is really good. Let's take a look further. And then Jacob talks about, exactly as you shared, how to improve engagement and pitfalls to avoid. Thank you so much. Now, in order for us to meet your learning expectation for this 2 hours workshop, let's move on to the next part of my slides itself. And I'd like you to help me out by establishing basically some ground rules. So if you could, what are some ground rules? Let me just post something, possibly like active participation. All right, so take about 1 or 2 minutes and help me out. Sharon talks about basically short perks up interval. That itself is actually very, very important. Typically, from the survey findings, I'll show you that most learners find that 4.5 hours is the maximum that most learners can actually stay focused online. For us in IAL, we are still running about a 6 full hours session in the morning, 3 hours in the afternoon, 3 hours. That is not the most ideal because of logistic issue, it helps us avoid the administrative nightmare to really reschedule all of the classes. But if you're having a full, say more than 3 hour session, you need to give them stretch breaks. So thank you, Sharon, for highlighting that. All right. So allow me to maybe just share the screen here. So these are some of the ground rules. Be open-minded, thank you. And safe environment, thank you. Hearing from the wisdom of the fellow participants as well. Being able to ask questions in a respectful way. Thank you, different ones of you. Respecting ideas, new trends in this bite-sized lesson. That's quite true. The new focus is basically moving into micro learning. But the issue with micro-learning, it will mess up the scheduling of your typical, training providers, because most of us are used to doing a 7 hours training or 3 hours training. So let's abide by these ground rules, all right? And at this point in time, allow me to share with you these ground rules that we've all agreed as a group. So one of the advantages of using Nearpod is basically whatever your learners have actually brainstormed, you're able to push out a copy to them. So let's get going to our session for today. All right, so take a look at the chat function. I've just pushed out some of the things that you can save as reminders for our session. Now, typically as you get into online training, it is always very important to do some form of administrative briefing. And I always make it a point to brief my learners no matter where they come from. So some reminders for all of us: make sure that your PC, browser, as well as your Zoom has got the latest updates. And typically, if you don't do that, it will interfere with your learning experience. The second part that we want, especially if you are a trainer, we encourage you to use an Ethernet cable if possible. Now, since COVID-19, I have upgraded all of my specs, technical specs, whether it's a webcam, my laptop, a microphone, or earpiece. And it's important for us to remind learners that avoid hotspots, all right? And typically, if the family is using Wi-Fi, or at the same time, it can literally slow down the speed in terms of receiving the information through Zoom. So for example, if your husband is watching Netflix, your daughter is maybe playing some games, or maybe your son is doing online learning, and if you are tucked into one corner in your house that is far away from your router, you're not going to have a very conducive learning experience. So be very mindful of that, and you have to remind your learners of all these administrative aspects. Now let's move on very quickly. Help me out, different ones of you, all right? It will be great. Thank you. I do see Jacob highlighting some things as well, all right? This season, it is the toolbar, that's right. And this season, some of these things do come out during your share screen function. I have noticed that for maybe about 3 months. All right, so each time, even when I update my Zoom account, you do have that. So if you're sharing your video, your toolbar, you need to shift it to a place where, you know what, it will not obstruct the actual vision itself. Thank you so much. Now help me understand different ones of you in terms of your readiness in using Zoom. Thank you. Okay, I have about 35 participants, but not everyone is participating right now, which is fine. Now, even if you are not wanting to participate, to me, if you're meeting your learners for the very first time, it is always important to find out where they are. I give you an example. I conduct a lot of Workforce Singapore career seminars, where literally 45 participants coming in, and I do not know them from Adam. And literally, you do not know whether they have got the technical specs, or do they know how to use Zoom. And oftentimes in the first, there are about 10 to 15 minutes, I will do a bit of a quiz or a poll to size up their comfort level. From there, I will begin to decide whether I need to do some form of an orientation pertaining to Zoom. So it looks like our group is pretty okay. Most of you are pretty all right. So let's move on. And if you're conducting training with people using Zoom for the very first time, be sure to highlight the different features. In our case here, I am not going to highlight this because you're quite familiar with them, all right? Now, the next part is something that I prepared for all of my workshops. And in all of my workshops, because you want to make sure that every learner has an opportunity to understand how to use the Zoom function, and especially if I find that maybe 40% of my participants are brand new to Zoom, I have to conduct what I call literally an orientation. So most of the time, I will have them maybe whip out their mobile phones, take a photo of this particular slide that will orientate them to the entire session itself, okay? So this is something that I want to encourage you to do. So much about the formality, let's get going. Now, our first activity, what I like us to do is this. I'm going to assign you to your respective breakout rooms, random. The first thing I'd like you to do is to introduce yourself briefly. And then two main things that I'd like you to do. Number one, I'd like you to discuss the common pitfalls and challenges you face when conducting online learning. The second thing I'd like you to do is, after you've done so, would you brainstorm in your small groups the possible solutions to resolve these challenges? Appoint a person within your group to key in your answers within Nearpod itself, and later on, as we gather back, I'm going to invite different ones of us to different groups to share. All right, so at this point in time, are we all good? If you're all right with this, allow me to just maybe check with you. Could you give me a reaction thumbs up if you're all good to go? Thank you, Gerald. What about the rest of you? Now we have about 44 participants logging on. Some of you may not have the Nearpod code, so allow me to push it out again. So if you're fine, my apologies, not this particular one. Let me just send it out again, all right? Thank you, Pavin. Thank you so much. All right. It really helps if you have colleagues or different ones helping you with all this technical issue. Now, if you're fine, allow me to assign you to your respective breakout rooms. We have about 44 right now. So let's get us into maybe 8 rooms. I'm doing that because why? In public runs, we do not know whether some of you may step up for a little while. In all of our classes, when we mandate that everyone turns on their video, we can track their participation. So I'm going to assign you to your respective groups. So you have all of the instructions on Nearpod right now. Let's take a total of 8 minutes. And 8 minutes later, let's bring everyone back. So be very brief in terms of your self-introduction. And then we'll gather back in about 8 to 10 minutes time. All right, have fun. Thank you. Can I call on the first group? That would be Grace, MT, Tan, as well as Simon's group to maybe share with us, please. Simon's group, could I have you appoint one person to maybe unmute your mic and then share with us what are some of the pitfalls? Am I getting a response from room 1?
Sorry, Brian. I think I'm trying to see who's the handsome guy who was talking.
Okay, no worries.
Valentina, is it Valentina just now? Earlier, who's the handsome guy name?
I think Gerald.
Gerald, can you be our speaker, please?
Is that Gerard or Gerald?
Gerald, I think. Gerald?
Sorry, who was the one who asked?
Would you like to maybe share on behalf of room 1 some of the common pitfalls and the solutions as well?
Okay, sure. So let me just. Okay, so we covered a few things. The first thing was the first thing was the lack of engagement as one of the main challenges. Second being the one of in the breakout, you know, if the trainer is in one of the breakouts and there's another breakout happening, there's the possibility of the small talk turning into gossip, and one cannot stop it.
Good.
Yeah, basically that's the gist of it.
Okay, good.
Yeah.
Just allow me to maybe summarize your points under the Nearpod itself. Very good. Let's have group 2. Amy, Cheryl, Retna, Hui, as well as Yao Ye. Could I have one response, please, from group 2? Room 2, calling on you.
Hello, I'm Amy from group 2. Okay, basically I wrote down the points from my group. Learners are not technical savvies. Environment is not conducive, be it for the trainer or for the learner. Also, trainer has limited activities to conduct over Zoom lessons. And also, learners asked to go for interim breaks every 30 minutes. Participants refuse to start their video or audio, particularly during public runs, refuse to participate and talk. Learners start to leave before any breakout rooms to avoid participation. Finding a co-facilitators to help on technical and any issue is difficult. Last but not least, gadgets tends to went out of battery during lesson.
Gadgets run out of battery. This is really a lot, so thank you, Amy. Thank you so much.
That's all from group 2. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much. Just allow me a while to just push this out. Let me stop the spotlight on you. What about room 3? We've got Sharon's group.
Yeah, because I think I asked the most questions, so I tapped it in. Right. So I guess one is a technical issue. Right. Sometimes it could be the tablet or the phone may not be a suitable one, or there's internet Wi-Fi connection is poor connection. Okay. The other one is the participant may not be familiar with the online system. Right, they may not use Zoom or Nearport or whatever, because nowadays there are so many types of online systems that the participants have to learn. Then of course the challenging one is the short attention span. Yeah.
Okay.
I guess it's a very common problem, challenges here.
Good. Did you manage to talk about what are some possible solutions?
Yeah, so thanks for sharing. I didn't get their names, right? So we talk about doing some rehearsals, getting it ready, have a checklist to run through, right? And also have some backup plans. Right. Just now there was one suggestion where it says that maybe if we do a 10 minutes lecture, followed by activities, right, in order to engage the participant.
This is actually a very good suggestion. Every 10 minutes of a lecture, get them into some form of an activity. So thank you, group 3, for sharing with us. What about group 4, Cedric's group? Edward, Linda, as well as Pavin.
Hi, Linda here. So there are 3 actually, collaborating internationally. Like for example, you have some learners from China, right, where the firewall or shortage of the software. Second will be getting engagement from learners for the first time, because all the learners are strangers. And the third one will be getting response and feedback from learners.
Response and feedback from learners. Thank you. And anything else? Now, did you all talk about how to resolve the issues?
Not really, because like for example, getting engagement from learners for the first time is you have to, because it's very difficult when you're trying to break the ice virtually as compared to face to face. So from there, I hope to get some tips from this session.
Right.
On the collaborating internationally, maybe to preempt ourselves, what are the software or anything that we can use for everyone, and then there's no hiccups during the live session itself.
Right.
And getting response and feedback, perhaps to get engagement in between the presentation itself. Maybe there's some pools and some sort of games and all.
Right. Thank you so much. I just want to make a comment before getting the next group 5, 6, 7, and 8 to quickly present to us. One of the key things, if you're doing international training, just last year I was doing an Asia Pac region, some from China, some from Indonesia, some from India, some from Thailand, some from Sri Lanka, all logging in at the same time. These were basically HR professionals, and they wanted me to touch on what are some of the things that they could do to promote promote resilience during this COVID-19 season. So some of the key challenges that you face is you want to make sure that the apps that you use for training is comparable to the different countries. The other thing to take note would be this, in our session, we had people from different countries having intermittent Wi-Fi or internet issues, and namely from India as well as Indonesia. And surprisingly, those who are from China, when they were logging in from the office, I think the infrastructure was a lot more steady to allow them to embrace. Some of the key things you want to take note as well is I did a training for an MNC in Singapore. Certain apps and technological tools are banned in their organization because of firewall issues or security issues. So it's always very important for us to be very mindful when you conduct a training, find out a little bit more. All right, thank you so much. What about group 5, group 6? Group 5, Derek, John, Sue, Sui Chai, as well as Victor. Can I have some response, please? Group 5. And then group 6, Jacob's group, be on standby. Any response from Derek, John, Sue, Sui Chai, as well as Victor?
Okay, I think some of the points already mentioned. Typically, is the engagement, the issue, whereby your lack of cues and responses for participants. So some of the solutions that the group brought up was probably for a start, you may have to be more directive, or you set some ground rules before the session. Or you may even direct the questions to individual learner to get their response. Of course, the trainers have to set the example, meaning to say they have to on the videos so that the rest can follow. Okay.
Right.
I think these are some of the points that the groups mentioned. If there are any other points, the groups can always chip in.
Thank you, John. Thank you so much. Now, one of the main challenges that I face in conducting classes or workshops outside of Institute for Adult Learning, not so much for the private runs for companies, because within the companies, most of the time, I will actually work with the training department to insist that when they come for our session, we will request for the participants to start their video. Because the moment you don't have them start their video, there is no way for you to track whether they are paying attention to you. There is no way for you to literally observe. Now, and these are some of the challenges I face, especially when I run workshops for WSG. Now, at the same time, you cannot mandate. One of the groups actually shared with me saying this, get the learners to pay. The moment they pay, they will have greater ownership to start the video. Honestly, I want to state here, like for today, all of us, we have a choice because this is just a workshop. You can start your video, you can maybe even mute yourself, or you could be just walking around, not participating in the session. And if you have not taken time to dialogue through this entire process with the organization, it can be a teething issue for you. All right, and it will be nothing much you can do except for you to just visit the different rooms. And therefore, whenever I do a public run where it is not mandated for them to start their video because you can't force it that way, I will always have to jumble up the group dynamics in terms of the breakout rooms. Why? Because when we randomly assign, there is no way for you to find out. Like for our session for today, we have some groups whereby 75% of everyone in the small group start their video. In some of the other groups, we have 100% who refuse to start their video for various reasons. So these are some things I'd like you to really think about as we move into fostering some form of an engagement. Very good. Let's move into room 6, Jacob's group. Niti, Thomas.
Okay, our group had the similar challenges with connectivity, security. One particular incident was a bank. Everything was banned, everything you can't, and so on and so forth. And like you said, Brian, when the apps are used, certain things don't function because of the firewall. Huge issue there. The other challenge was client platform. So sometimes clients want to use other platforms, WebEx, and we all, I think, sort of unanimously agree we hate Microsoft Teams. It's just terrible. Then the other aspect of it was that the rules of engagement that we established, they don't follow. Basic one, as we mentioned, is turning on the camera. They don't. And then we also discussed, doing pre-course work and maybe bite-sized work during the workshop and etc. Again, we can't mandate. Some do, some don't. Those who do really benefit. Those who don't, well, we just stare at each other. We also talked about, at least for me, I do a lot of international, regional, like you, Bryan, and same issues are there when you go to breakout rooms. They turn on the video, the screen freezes. When you don't turn on the video, we don't know. And then when you go to the breakout room, some speak English fluently, some don't. And so you have a chicken and egg, duck issue, basically chicken and duck, and they don't communicate. So by the time we come back from the breakout room, the guy says, I was only one there. Another guy says, I don't understand his English, and all these issues. And we can't really help it to some extent. Brainstorm ideas, we said that we should try a different combination tools, Mentimeter, Neo, all Padlers and what have you. But again, not everything works across the region or across companies. So that's a challenge. And then we said, okay, another thing we could do is to, at least for me, I tried getting people to get away from the screen to avoid fatigue, but at the same time, use whatever works for you. So if you're in the same room, please talk to each other. If you're not, talk to each other on the WhatsApp, take out a WhatsApp and use a video function. And so those work, but again, it depends on whether people actually follow the instructions. If they don't and they disappear altogether, you don't know. And then some come back, some don't. Bottom line, I think, is two things. Number one, for us as facilitators to be really flexible, adaptable, patient, persevering, and then to manage expectations of what is possible and realistic and what isn't. But the other side of it also is that there is no, I'm sure you agree, Bryan, there's no fixed formula. What works for one company, one situation, one connection issue doesn't work for another. So I think that the industry by and large, and us adult trainers, learners, teachers, whatever, are still in the process of figuring out what works, and we control what we can, but the other aspect we can't, which is the client side, the participant side. And I think we probably will have another more sessions like this to discuss what else have you learned.
That's right. Thank you, Jacob. Thank you so much for sharing. Now, the reality is true. If your client has a preferred platform, you have to get used to it. Or the platform has limitations in terms of fostering learners' engagement, you will be bound by it. So these are real issues. Some of the key things that Jacob has highlighted, when you have international participants, it all depends on whether they are from the same company. Now, if they are not from the same company, sometimes if they are from the same company, you can actually work with the HR side, like I did before we did the Asia Pac webinar. For about 4 hours, we actually dialogue with the HR director, and then we meet some plans to position the groups in certain groupings. But what Jacob has highlighted is really true. The reality that if you are having multiple cultures coming in, multiple cultures can cause breakdown in communication. One of the key things that I've learned from my American mentor, she's already past 85 years old, when I traveled with her to 15 different countries, she would say this, Bryan, when you are in a different culture, all right, speak slower and take note, humor don't translate. So one of the key things to take note would be this: for us as trainers, what we can control is the instructions has got to be verbal. At the same time, I like to always print out the instructions basically on my slides or on the tech platform, so that in any case, if there is some form of a miscommunication, they can still refer to the slides. So excellent point from group 6. What about room 7, Ben's group, as well as room 8 as well? Come.
Okay, I think I was nominated as the spokesperson. Yeah, I got a good group. All of them are, the 2 of them are trainers. I am a caseworker who do talks for other organizations and even the public. As we agree that, of course, we are experts in our fields and we are very good at soft skills. But when it comes to the technical part of it, handling the digital, we lack the savvy, the technical skills. So that's quite discouraging for us. That As for me, I think I'm very blessed to always insist and have a technical support person who's willing to come in to support me on the technical part of presentation. Then I can blabber myself, you see, with whatever I know. So I feel that with that, the suggestions would be, yeah, of course, having a technical support to enhance your presentation. And again, the other one would be having more and more training. Take time to train yourself to get better on the technical aspects of your presentation. The third one would be more on the emotional side. Never get disheartened because we are enthusiastic about giving the best content of our presentation to our clients, but the technical part might become a little disruption. So never get disheartened. And of course, the fourth one would be having a good set ground rules so that we can move smoothly and slowly so that our clients will understand what we are trying to deliver. That's it.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Let me just type in some of the key pointers within Nearport itself. Thank you. Allow me to remove the spotlight on you. And finally, room 8, would you share with us? Come. Room 8 will be Chun Eng, Jirish, Jenny, Ning, and ZY.
Yeah, hi everybody, good evening, and good evening to you, Brian, as well. Yeah, so for us, Group 8, we highlighted a few things such as lacking of certain language skills because we have a trainer amongst us. It's Ming, who teaches traditional medicine. So he finds it a bit challenging when his audience perhaps doesn't speak the kind of English that needs to get the class on its way. On my end, I would think tech skills can be a little bit challenging because I have on my own tried to introduce certain platforms like Kahoot, even Padlet, and I found out that the youngsters are very eager and ready, in fact, to apply that, whereas the senior learners, they might fumble. And my concern is that when that happens, do they have like a mind block, and that's when the learning suddenly stops for them. So that's something I had discussed with them. And I think Jenny also highlighted to us that something like the lack of interaction was something that she's very concerned with, because she had cited that she had tried to teach the seniors how to take a screenshot, and that was very difficult to do over an online platform. But I guess she managed to do it somehow, so kudos to her as well. Yeah, so that's the kind of challenges that Group 8 faces.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Let me just post out under the Nearport. Thank you so much, Group 8. Now, you will realize that the challenges are multiple. And in fact, while you guys were in your breakout rooms, we had someone by the name of 906654, something like that, who logged in. And I was trying to verify the ID, and then I basically gave myself there about 10 minutes that if this individual does not rename himself, we would have to remove the participants from the session itself. Typically within IAL or with clients that I work with where we know the individuals, it is fine. But the moment we have public runs where different ones were to log in from and they do not take time to introduce themselves by keying in their actual name, we actually do remove them for the sake of preserving the security of the participants. Now, at this point in time, allow me to share the collaborative work that was done by the group via the chat function within Zoom itself. Now, with all of these things that are coming towards us, pertaining to technical skills, some of the key things that I've taught trainers to do is never introduce too many tech tools right at the start. Especially if you're having them for the first session, you want to avoid using multiple platforms. And generally, thank you. I think Cedric just pushed out something by saying this. Participants within China cannot access Google Docs during the breakout session itself. All right, Microsoft Teams allow for real-time document sharing. So now within Zoom itself, there is no real-time file sharing. The only thing that you could do is within your chat function, you can actually push out a PDF a spreadsheet or a Word document or a PNG file or image file. So if you're looking into that, you literally would have to begin to study your options. So for those of you who does a lot of work in China, feel free to respond to Cedric as well. All right. So one of the key things to take note is this: in all of my public run, I never use a lot of other tech tools. I give you an example. For public runs that I do for Workforce Singapore, I will only push out the slides, and the only thing that I will use is Padlet. And so for the entire day or 6 hours, I will use only one Padlet link, and I'll break down into multiple columns so that the learners will not have any difficulties assessing it. So some of the key things to take note: if you are seeing your learners for the very first time, you have to take time to do orientation, which is one of the pitfalls that you have to avoid. Because if you don't take time to orientate, my oldest learner this year has been a 74-year-old uncle as well as an auntie. Came into one of my Module 3 class, and she was extremely vocal by saying, I hate technology because why? It is impersonal. But at the end of the Module 3 that we do training in ACLP, she amazes all of us by utilizing all of the tech tools that I taught in Module 3 class, beating even the younger ones. So literally, you have to be very, very mindful. And if you have never seen your participants for the first time, or you do not know much about their background, I will always say this: use the least amount of tech tools possible to drive engagement. And secondly, all right, so that there would not be any form of technical issues. All right. Now, allow me to just move on right now with our course content. And time is a little bit tight for us, but not to worry. Now, if you take a look at my shared screen itself, the top challenges for survey educators revolve around the following. Number one, the assess connectivity, reliability of technological tools as well as devices. And therefore, one of the key things that I always do is for public runs, I will send my participants a list of requirements, which means that before you come in for my session, please make sure that you have all of these technical requirements, and I will give them basically the link. I will point them to the Zoom URL for them to download and to teach them exactly what needs to be done. So this is the first thing. Now, having said that, no matter how much you emphasize on that, you would have learners who come in with very old computer and laptop, and that itself will interfere with the entire learning experience. The next issue is basically digital skills. But if you ask me, for us as trainers, doing multitasking can be very, very difficult. And this is something that I acknowledge, and this is something that you really have to, just give me a while, you really have to keep practicing. So we have an ACLP Module 3. If you are interested, you can sign up for that. But if not, I will always say this: when you are practicing using Zoom, for me, I have a series of platforms. I've got a main laptop, I've got a BT backup, and when I started out, I will bring in even my iPad as well as my smartphone. Why? Because when you log in, it is always important for you to see what your learner should be or can see through their device. Because many times they will be telling you, I can't see this, I can't access that. And if you don't have a device reflecting what your learners is seeing right now, it's harder for you to navigate. So when I started out there about 5 years ago, literally I had multiple devices set up. Why? One as a trainer, one as a co-host, one logging in as a learner, so that I can see exactly what the learners are viewing. So that will really help you, okay? So take note of that. So feel free to respond to some of the questions that are coming in through the chat. Honestly, if you ask me, social interaction is one part of it. And Jiri's just basically asked a question. There is nothing much you can do. If, like one of the groups highlighted, why don't we give them a 5-minute stretch break every 30 minutes? You think about it, if you go for a 30 minutes, a 5-minute stretch break, 1 hour, you will be giving them 10 minutes. 2 hours, 20 minutes, 3 hours, 30 minutes. And if you factor in what we call break time, that is 15 minutes, you're losing about 45 minutes or even more for 1 hour session. So some of the things that I do is sometimes I get them to stand up during the session and do a bit of a stretch. But throughout all of my session, I utilize a lot of breakout rooms so that you can foster a bit of a social interaction and the learner's engagement through tech tools, all right? But if you're conducting public workshops where learners are given an option to start or to stop their video, it can be very hard on your aspect to be able to track. So for those kind of a workshop, I will always say this, you have to be flexible, like what Jacob says. So some of the things that I do is this, I weave in a lot of small little activities. Even if they do not want to talk in a breakout rooms, they can participate in a quiz. They can participate in a poll, all right? Or I try to keep my lecturing there about 10 minutes. After 10 minutes, get them into small groups discussion, then coming back. So that helps to break out in terms of the mental fatigue. But the reality is this, that if you're moving forward, my recommendations is literally not extending your Zoom sessions beyond 4 hours per session. And best, if you really want to stretch it, for us, is 6 hours, a full day. I will always make sure that I factor in a lot of break in between, and that lunch time, I do not cut it to about 45 minutes. Why? Because learners need that 1 hour full lunch to really tune out, rest, relax before they can come back and engage again. So take note of that, okay? Now for a start, what can you use for polling? You can try out Poll Daddy, Poll Everywhere. You can use also Survey Monkey. At the same time, you can try out Mentimeter. All right, it is a little bit more glam. Some people have actually tried to use AHA slides. So some I use Slido, but if you're using FOC apps, you want to make sure that there are limitations. Like Mentimeter, you can only ask, there are about 2 questions per Mentimeter link. So these are things that you want to think about, okay? Good. Now, some people say it's 1 hour webinar. When you do a breakout sessions, people start leaving the sessions. Honestly, the only thing that you can do is to lay ground rules. And if it is a free workshop, typically I would say this, after doing this for about 2 years, you cannot control. And the only thing that you can do is to make it as interesting as possible so that those people who miss out will want to come back in again. So let's move on. Now, if you take a look, one of the key things that have been highlighted by the different groups is basically this, a lack of interaction. Now, don't worry about taking notes, because at the end of the session, I'll be working with Jonta to make sure that you have a deck of my slides. So some of the key things is this, a lack of interaction among classmates, lack of interactions between learners, facilitators, and lecturers. And another distraction would be basically, you know what, your home environment is not the most conducive. So some of the key things to take note is basically this, the only way that you can deal with this entire aspect of a lack of interaction is to utilize as many what I call breakout sessions as possible. And allow me to stop the screen share. In all of our workshops in IAL and in all of the workshops that I conduct for my client, where I insist that they start their video and it is part of the course requirement, we don't have issues at all, okay? And typically, if it is a public workshop, you have lesser control. So let's move on. Now, the survey has actually indicated for us that the preference is not more than 4.5 hours in total. This is really true. And in fact, in IAL, the reason why they've converted a full day class into a 6 hours, 9 to 12, and then 1 hour break for lunch, and then there are about 1 to there are about 5, or 2 to there are about 5, is because of the fact that, you know what, is scheduling issues. But if you can control, my recommendation is basically keeping it to not more than 4 hours in total, all right? Let's move on. Screen fatigue is one of the key things. So sometimes what I do is rather than showing them the slides, we get them to start the video. And sometimes after there are about 10 minutes, some of the icebreakers or energizers that I do is I will get the learners to go to their room or their office and grab an item and come back and begin to use that item to share with us how that item relates to learning. So getting them out of their seats, moving on, and to grab something, coming back, or sometimes I have my learners who volunteer. I've got yoga teachers in my class, and after, say, there are about 2 hours, I will have the yoga teacher say, okay, everyone, let's do a quick 45 seconds stretch. So these are the little things that you can literally engage, okay? So let's move on. Now, one of the key things I want to do is, as we get into the content, we have about 15 minutes. I want to highlight a few things. I want to give you some theory first and then get you into your respective small groups. Every structured learning experience has 4 core elements with the learner at the center of it all. This is important, all right? And if you take a look, there are 4 key elements, the learners. You want to consider who your learners are. Number 2, the facilitator, that is us. Because we are the one who design the lesson plan, we facilitate and we conduct assessment. Number 3, we have to be mindful about the competency. So everyone, would you stretch out your hand and say with me, hate, heart, hands. So sometimes what I do is this, that in the midst of the class, rather than them listening to me, I will get them to repeat certain things after me. So competencies refers to the things that you're teaching them, whether is it TCM, traditional Chinese medicine, or whether is it technical stuff. These are the competencies, and the nature of the competencies can affect whether your blended learning formula will work. And finally, we always want to examine the environment. So whether is it your tech tools that you're using, video conferencing platforms, or the context within which your learners are experiencing the learning itself. And allow me to maybe just highlight a few things right now. And for you to remember easily, I have come out with this little elf with a C. So you think of an elf with letter C, so whether a little baby or a bulldog wearing an elf costume. So E for environment, all right? What is the environment that limits you? Is it just classroom training? Is it online training? Or is it asynchronous learning? For today's session, we want to focus mainly on video conferencing platforms. Number 2, L for learners. Who are your learners? Number 3, what about you? What is your comfort level, your skill sets? And finally, the competencies. And with that, allow me to lead us into the next part of our content right now. Now, the research have actually shown us that literally, if you want a stronger online learning itself, there must be 3 presence you must ensure to take place in an online learning environment. So the 3 presence basically will affect learning. And the first one that I want to highlight is basically the teaching presence. Teaching presence means that you as a trainer, as a teacher, how do you design, facilitate your learning in such a way that engages the learners itself, all right? Number 2, so Sharon has got a question. I'm unable to attend to your question right now, but if the rest of you have got some input, feel free to respond to her. Number 2 is the social presence. And later on, we're going to talk about, now, if you are getting into an online learning environment itself, it is very critical for you to get the learners into like a social community. If your session is only 2 hours, it can be quite hard. You have limited time. But if your session is over a series of 3 days or over 3 weeks, it is easier for you to build that social presence, all right? The third aspect is literally the cognitive presence, which talks about basically how do you engage them. And this, we are looking into avoiding passive learning by listening only, but rather moving into active learning itself. So right now, I want to just highlight very quickly in the next 3 minutes, I'd like you to examine these 5 pillars of a motivating instructor, all right? It can work for a face-to-face session as well as an online session. And we want to look into the whole essence of basically the expertise, empathy, all right, enthusiasm, clarity, as well as cultural responsiveness. So this is something that I'd like you to look into. So number one, think about yourself as a trainer. Do you know the subject well? And most of us, we know the subject matter very, very well. So that is really great. Okay. Number two, all right, you need to know something that is beneficial for the adults. And someone just responded in our chat function by saying there's hard sell what is in it for them. And it is important right at the start of the session to highlight the learning outcomes and at the same time show them how that can apply in their personal or professional life. And the third aspect that I want you to look into for expertise is, are you prepared to convey and to construct knowledge with the adults through an instructional process? And I want to highlight here that a good learning experience does not happen by chance. It comes from good design as well as good facilitation. So let's move on. So I'd like you to think about yourself out from the 5 pillars, which are your strongest and which are the ones that you need to work on. Number 2, empathy. Do you have a realistic understanding about who your learners are, what they want to learn when they come into the workshop? What are they struggling with? And if you know your learner's profile in terms of their educational level, are you able to be empathetic to adapt your instruction to the learner's requirement? Now, recently, when I was conducting a blended class with IL, both face-to-face as well as online, one of the things that one of the trainers who is teaching first aid reported to me that what he has seen me do is literally that typically at the start, I will do a bit of an icebreaker to get them to introduce themselves. So once you know the background of your learners, and now in a workshop of about 45, it's harder for me to do that. But if you have a workshop up to about 20, you can do that. And what I did was, once I know their background, and throughout the entire series of training, I will always relate practical examples to their industry. And that way you're showing empathy. The other aspect is, what about learners who are struggling with the tech tools and the learning process? They're feeling tired. What can we do to consider their perspective as well as their feelings? Next aspect, enthusiasm. What about our teaching presence? Have you done your makeup? Some of us, you know what, you need to do a bit of a makeup. For some of you, you need to invest in literally a very good webcam and put in some form of a filter. And the next thing I'd like you to take note would be our dressing. So even though we are teaching from home, but it's always important for us to dress up for the occasion. What about our eye contact? So literally, if you are doing training, you should not be looking at your slides, but you should be looking at a webcam, especially when you're interacting with your learners. And finally, are you able to display your commitment through the varying degrees of vocal charisma, body language, as well as your communication skills? Next part, clarity. In your lesson plan and in your delivery, is there lots of clarity? Are you providing scaffolds for them to hang on? And finally, it's basically this: have you been able to create a safe, inclusive, respectful learning environment? And have you been able to engage the motivation of all of your learners, regardless of where they come from? And have you been able to relate the course content to their background? So with all of these 5 key pillars, can I invite you right now to go into your Nearpod and help me by keying in basically one of your greatest strengths, all right, and one area for improvement. Can you do that, please? Let's take about 1 minute. About 1 minute and begin to assess yourself in all of these 5 aspects and begin to ask yourself, which is one aspect that you are the strongest, which is one aspect that you are the weakest that you want to grow in. Expertise, empathy, enthusiasm, clarity, or cultural responsiveness. So these are things that I'd like you to basically take some time to really think about. And in the interest of time, we have only about 14 minutes. I'm going to skip the small group discussion. But in my lesson plan, I actually wanted you guys to get into groups of 2 or 3 and begin to share with each other what is one area of your strength, what is one area that you want to improve on. So typically how I design my lesson is after each segment, there will be an application time and there will be some opportunity for some form of a social interaction. Now, can I call on different ones of you right now? So allow me to maybe just share. Pavin, can I call on you? Pavin wrote down cultural responsiveness. Could I invite you, Pavin, to unmute your mic and share with us when you talk about cultural responsiveness, what are some things that you do when you're conducting online learning? Come.
Hi, Brian. Thanks for calling me, and thank you very much for having me here. It's so nice being in a room with you, leading us again. Yeah.
Thank you.
So I think cultural responsiveness for me, and I'm a great fan of Lodkowski. I kind of, there's a overlap to an extent with empathy, because if I recognize that there are different kinds of groups in the room, then I will tune in. I think it's a little bit like what you said earlier. Once you're sensitive to the different cultures in the room in terms of maybe their language background, their cultural references, the examples that you want to give, then automatically you would select or you would choose words and vocabulary and examples and cultural references that tune in to those sensitivities.
Thank you so much, Pavin. Thank you so much for sharing. All right. Allow me to remove the spotlight from her. And let's have another person share with us. Now, another example of cultural responsiveness is typically it takes me about 1.5 hours to be able to size up my learners for deeper interaction. And how many of you know that not all learners can group together and work together? So if you really want them to work together, find out their personal preference. So typically I allow learners to get into their own respective small groups for a start. Then subsequently, I will begin to adjust the groupings progressively. So in some of my public runs, we have workshops where the groups enjoy each other's company so much they do not want to change. And yet I do have sessions whereby, you know what, after there are about 2 rounds of breakout session, they say we want to interact with other people to find out more about what they do. Okay, thank you so much. Let's have maybe one other person to really share. Can I have maybe Kumar, if you could help me? I'm not sure whether I got your name right. All right. Awani Kumar, would you share with us? Would you unmute your mic and share with us?
Oh, it's Girish actually, so it's Girish.
Okay,
yeah.
Got it.
Yeah, for me, it's I think my personal strength will be enthusiasm. I kind of think my enthusiasm is my personal strength, because I'm always kind of like doubting my expertise, because I'm always having that feeling that, oh, maybe my participants know more than me. So it's kind of like a bugbear, you know. It's like an axe that I placed over my head. I shouldn't be doing that. I'm trying to resolve that, because of course in my training classes, I mean, the population are, after all, my colleagues as well, you see, and some of them may be more senior than me, some of them may be my juniors, so it's always very dicey when I go for classes, you see.
Right. Now, I like the fact that you feel that sometimes your learners do have things to share, and I believe for us as trainers, we don't have to feel insecure, and the reality is this: we will not know everything. So what we want to focus on is basically what we can bring to the table to the learning environment, and yet share with us now, when it comes down to enthusiasm, how do you display your enthusiasm during online learning or training?
I like using Kahoots, Kahoot, the platform, the gaming platform.
Okay.
Yeah.
And besides that, what else do you do?
Besides that, I'm always I'm playing music, or I'm as animated as I possibly can. I don't know whether it's by design because I'm Indian, but my hands move all over the place as well. I know I'm always glancing at screens. I go into breakout rooms. I'm always checking if they understand where we are at this point in the class, and that sometimes wears me down, because after, at the end of the day, I'm so tired, and I still ask myself, I hope the class has learned something.
Right.
Yeah. So that's something that I go through, lah.
Right. Thank you so much. Now, I like the fact that you talk about the whole essence, that it's not just because you have Indian blood within you, but the reality is this, that over the screen, we must convey our enthusiasm. And if you are excited about what you teach, most of the time, your learners will catch on ultimately. So thank you so much for sharing. All right. So let's move on in terms of our timing right now. So let me just close this. Now, we're going to skip this peer sharing activity. Now, this one we're going to skip as well. I want to just move on to the next part in terms of social presence. So we talk about the teaching presence. And when it comes down to teaching presence, I'd like you to evaluate yourself, your expertise, your empathy, your enthusiasm, clarity, and cultural responsiveness. Identify your strengths and yet work on those areas that can help you create a stronger teaching presence online. The second part that we want to examine is basically social presence. Social presence means this: how are the learners connected to each other in small groups? Do they know each other? Are they familiar? Besides just introducing their background, do they know each other deeper to facilitate the entire learning process? So some of the key things that you want to look at would be this: the social presence ties in with the lack of social interaction, which means this, that if you are not factoring in what we call lots of breakout room sessions within the session itself, your training session is basically a lot more download of information, but learners want to interact. So now, Bukowski talks about 4 key principles, and later on, before you go, I'm going to give you a handout that lists out 66 strategies. So if I can bait you to stay with me until the end, I'm going to give out 66 strategies on how you can redesign and how you can facilitate your learning session to make it a lot more engaging. So now the first part we want to look into is inclusion. How are you going to make your learners feel included? All right. The second part is how you're going to influence the shift of their attitudes. And after that, I'm going to move on to the cognitive presence, where I'm going to highlight to you basically what are some ways for you to build meaning as well as competence itself. All right. So stay on with me. Now, inclusion means this. Now, how do you create and affirm a learning environment where learners and trainers feel respected and connected to each other? So what we've done is ground rules. What we've done is we've gotten them to set their learning expectation. Sometimes at the start of the training session itself, I will literally have learners to bring something to share. So it could be an icebreaker, but you want to inject in some form of a fun. So some of my recent class, they actually do a screenshot posting in different format, where I brought in my ukulele and I shared how ukulele ties into the content where I was teaching. But it's important for you to establish inclusion right at the start of the session itself. So if you only have 2 hours, you got to do a very quick one to just get started. The next aspect we are looking at is basically developing attitudes. Now, within the first part of your lesson itself, how do you create and affirm a favorable disposition towards the learning experience through personal relevance as well as volition? Now, some of the things that I do here is literally, just give me a while. Allow me to just, thank you, Pavin, for highlighting. Let me just shift this up a little bit, all right? I'm gonna close my webcam so that at least it will not interfere with your screen itself. Now, allow me to just move on. So now the key thing is basically this. I will always share success stories of my learners, like the 74-year-old auntie as well as uncle who survived all of my classes. I will also share how learners sometimes may feel a little bit threatened or stressed right at the start. And sometimes what I do is at the end of one cohort, I will actually do a video recording of them and having them to share how the course has actually benefited them. So these are some strategies that you want to look into, okay? Now, let's move on to cognitive presence, all right? And with the cognitive presence, we're looking into 2 aspects, because if you do not come out with activities to engage them, they are literally just passively listening to you. So what we want to look at will be this: the 4 conditions. You have inclusion, you have attitude, the third aspect is basically meaning, and the fourth aspect is basically competence, right? So when it comes down to meaning is how do you create challenging and engaging learning experiences that includes their perspective as well as their values. For this, you want to plan it throughout the lesson. So remember inclusion and attitude right at the start. Meaning, which is activities, all right, or learning activities you want to plan throughout the session itself. And finally, if you look into it, helping them to feel competent, which means this, how do you create or affirm an understanding that the learners would have effectively learned something they value and perceive as authentic to their real world, using case studies, citing practical examples, and best is for you to plan throughout, and let me just highlight this, throughout the lesson, and especially towards the end of the lesson itself. Okay, now with this, we want to do a little bit of a matching activity, and then I want to push out the 66 strategies for us to get into our small group discussion, all right? So if you take a look at my slides before we do a matching activity, take a look here. Number one, inclusion, making them feel connected. Attitudes, making them feel that they have a sense of choice and telling them why they should be motivated to attend the session itself. Number three, meaning. They must find relevant through learning activities. And finally, number four, competence, that they understand that whatever they learn, they can apply into their real world situation. So let's get into a bit of a matching activity right now. If I can have you go into your Nearport, you will see something like this. All right, to see everything, I need you to match the condition of learning to the right description. What you could do is you can move towards the left side, click on the upward arrow, you can see everything. So for example, let me illustrate. For example, inclusion, you take a look, you click here, and it is to create an environment where they feel respected and connected to each other. All right, so can I have you take some time to complete this, please? So take a look at the pair. Inclusion basically is making them feel connected. Attitudes, helping them to feel a sense of personal relevance to the course they are attending, giving them choices so that they will be more positive as they attend your class. Meaning, creating different learning activities for them to participate, and finally helping them recognize that whatever they learn can be applied into their personal life. All right, so our next task as we wrap up there are about maybe 10 to 15 minutes. What I'd like us to do is, let's take a look at our instructions here. I'd like you to refer to the 60 strategies that have been given to you, and I like you to focus on this particular aspect. So you're going to look into the IAMC, and for example, let me illustrate here. Out from the 60 strategies in your groups, select the ones that would help you foster the following. So that would be basically your inclusion. What can you do as a trainer to foster inclusion? Number two, that of attitudes. All right. Number three, looking into meaning. And finally, that of competence itself. Okay, so that will be something we like to do. So if you're fine with that, let's get into our small groups right now. So before we do so, now there is a question that comes on board from Cedric. Some of this can be converted into online. Some of it, you can actually modify it within the face-to-face session as well. So take a look here. So this will be something that if you can save, it will be almost like a checklist for you every time you're doing a training session, all right? And if you take a look here, when it comes down to inclusion, you have 11 strategies. When it comes down to developing attitude, you've got 12 all the way to 27. For enhancing meaning, you have 28 all the way up to about 47 itself. And when it comes down to competence, you have 48 all the way up to 60. For online, you have to be a little bit more deliberate, and for Sharon, you have to find a tech tool that you're comfortable with before you launch it. Good.
Just now we're discussing if you want to do rehearsal, then I have to go and grab somebody else, somebody else to do a rehearsal. So if the person is a learner, I'm the trainer, and I have to run through, right? Just to be familiarized with all the tools of that.
Yes, you could get your family members to participate, but if they are not able to participate with you as you rehearse your technical skills, I suggest that you set up first one laptop and then another backup,
and then
a mobile phone. And in fact, earlier on, Chun Eng was saying that he couldn't see the 60 strategies at all. One of the things that I should have reminded the entire group is if your learners log in through mobile device, it will impact the way they see the features in terms of the near-port activities or the slides as well. So this is actually very, very good point. Good. So what I want to suggest as we bring this to a close, and I want to open this up for maybe some form of a Q&A, is I want to encourage you to use all these 60 different strategies. Now, earlier on, Ragnar was asking me if you have 5 sessions of 1 hour each, how do you foster greater engagement? Number one, we recommend the use of breakout rooms. But in reality, if your session is only 1 hour, you want to manage your breakout sessions not more than 10 to 15 minutes. Because why? If your breakout sessions are too long, most of the time they will go for a coffee break, they will go for a toilet break, extended toilet breaks, or they will just zone out. So most of the time, when it comes down to breakout sessions, the longest I've given is there about 12 to 15 minutes. And one of the tedious thing you have to do is you have to visit each of the rooms to just make sure that they are on the doing the things that you have called them to do. All right. Any responses, any questions from the different groups? Or maybe give me some indicator how useful are these 60 different strategies to foster engagement. Come. Now, for those of you who have never handled what we call online learning itself, maybe before I share this, this was something that I actually shared in 2 of the public workshops that was hosted. One was hosted by InLab, the other one was hosted by IAL. And in my years of teaching online learning, and in the years of encountering different types of learners, I've categorized them into 4 groups. In fact, it's two groups of 2 and one last group of 3. So typically when your learners come into the learning session, and most of the time for people who are in their early 20s, you have this group. They know how to use Zoom, so high knowledge and skills in using Zoom. Even though they may not be familiar with any form of a tech platform, but the moment you expose them to it, they know naturally by instinct how to use it. So this group, I basically call them the ones who will soar in your class. Now, when I'm talking about this, I'm talking about not just a 1 or 3 hours workshop, because a 3 hours workshop, this is where you want to limit the tech tools that you're introducing. But if you're meeting your learners over a period of time, you want to scout out who are the ones who can soar and fly in your class. These are the ones you want to tap on them to have them maybe coach some of the slower learners. Next, so for Sharon, I need to ask you, or maybe the different ones of you, some of you are high usage in terms of Zoom, which means you know how to use Zoom as a learner. Then your next task is to learn how to use Zoom as a trainer, because the toggling aspect is going to be very, very different. Okay. Now, since we are on this aspect, if you are doing training, how many of you, if you take a look at your Zoom window on the top right side, you will see an icon called View. Can I have you click on it? If you click on the top right-hand side, it is either Speaker, number 1, Gallery, or Full Screen. Now, if you click on Speaker, you will see whoever is speaking, full screen. When I'm doing training, especially to big groups of people, I always like to toggle it to Gallery, Because when I get them to start their video, I can monitor whether they are feeling tired, feeling sleepy, or not concentrating. So if your learners do not start the video, honestly, it is actually very hard for a full day workshop to monitor their learning. And the last aspect, if you click on it, all right, on the top right side is a full screen. Can I have all of you click on it, full screen? Now, it will occupy the entire screen of your laptop. When I do training, I recommend you to exit the full screen. So click on it again, exit the full screen so that you can toggle to your browser. You can toggle to your Word document. You can toggle to your Google Slides. So this is one key function I always train my learners. You expose them. So for today, 2 hours, I don't have time to do a lot of orientation. But if my learners come into my session after finding out their knowledge level in using Zoom, I will conduct a quick 10 minutes orientation. Okay. The other thing to take note would be this. Now, for Cheryl, can I have you say something, please? Unmute your mic and say something.
Hi.
Okay, if you're doing training, so now take a look at Cheryl. We are only seeing Cheryl from your nose upwards. Okay. So if you're doing training, some of the key things to do is this. You have to make sure that you position your face appropriately. Like that is a little bit too big, all right? You don't want to be doing this. So some of the things that I'm asking you to do is invest, go to IKEA, a cheap little stand that you can see here will help you prop up your laptop. Some of you, I think, Girish, you are looking down. If you're doing training for about 6 hours, I guarantee you at the end of one day, you will have neck aches, and then the only person who will be happy will be your masseur. So these are things I'd like you to take note of. You also want to have a nice corporate background. So take a look, Jonta, would you say something?
Yep, hi.
Everyone take a look at Jonta. This is a very nice corporate background. So these are things that I'd like you to be very mindful. For me today, because my room is very conducive, I am just using the speaker and the microphone from my laptop. But do invest in an AirPod. I do want to encourage you to try out. I like AirPods Pro because why? It has got noise cancellation. I remember recently, there was, just give me a while first. Chuneng, don't mind me muting you because we can hear a bit of your background. Recently, my neighbor upstairs was doing renovation, and I was worried that my learners could hear all of the noise, but thank goodness for AirPods Pro that saved the list for me. The second thing that I'd like you to check out is Jabra. Anything that is Jabra wireless is actually quite good and is slightly cheaper than AirPod. So these are good wireless earpods that you may want to invest if you are doing a lot more training. During, I think that was last year, during a great sale, I bought myself a Logitech. So if you take a look here, this is my additional external webcam. So if you're doing a lot more training, be very, very mindful of that. Jacob's background is all right, for you to participate. But if you're doing a bit more of a training in a corporate setting, it may be a little bit too dark. So these are things that I'd like you to think about. For Sharon, how many of you, if you're using dual screen, you want to make sure that when you are looking at the screen, your learners will be looking at your side profile. So always be mindful of that. Cedric, your background, good for today. Padma as well, but if you're doing more corporate training, you want to choose something that is a bit more appropriate. Jirif, what we can see is your fan plus the lights, so you have to take note. So these are things that you will not know until you try out. So Cedric, we can see your form, but we can't really see your face and your features. So these are things that, you know what, when you're doing training, do some form of investment. Padma, I like the fact that I think your sofa is very nice. Either that is an office desk chair. It's very, very good. So I actually invested in an external keyboard. You see it here. All right. So that, you know what, if you're doing training for more than 6 hours, do a bit of an investment. Now, we are past there about 2 minutes, but what I'd like us to do is this. Let's get back into this aspect. So if you have learners who are very strong in terms of tech tools, these are the learners you want to put into your small groups to help those who are weaker. So some of you may be using a lot of tech tools, but you are not so familiar with Zoom. With this group of people, a short orientation, they can start hopping and running. While others, you can use Zoom, you seldom use tech tools, give them some form of an orientation, no issue at all. But the nightmare that most of you would be scared of as trainers would be those who are low tech tools and low Zoom. So these are the ones that you want to be very intentional to spot them right at the start of your workshop so that you can provide a lot more care as well as guidance for them, okay? So if they are having issues logging in, they will not be able to participate. So as we wrap up, I trust that this 60 strategies would be something that is very useful for you. Now, learning does not happen by chance. And a quotation that I like a lot says this: it is how we choose what we do and how we approach it that will determine the sum of our days adds up to a formless blur or something that resembles a work of art. And one of the best practice when it comes down to engagement that I recommend is when you're showing them your slides and you go on talking for about 5 minutes, they will lose attention. So sometimes what I do is I annotate on my slides so that, you know what, as they are seeing my slides, they are also picking up the things that I'm wanting them to focus on. And I want to encourage you that, you know what, whether facilitation or design, to foster lots of social interaction as well as engagement, it takes effort from us, trial and error, but most of all, making intentional effort to make learning intentional. And with this, I want to maybe have you, maybe I could invite Jonta to just share this with different ones of you through the email. IAL came up with 6 principles of learning design. So we don't have time to go through this, but in essence, allow me to just highlight some of the salient points, and then we will wrap up our session for today. So if you take a look at this particular icon here, some of the key things, and now allow me to maybe just change it, is this: you want to get learners to perform a task, and this means meaning. And preferably the task should mirror what is on the real life, where there is construction as well as application. And the only way for you to get them into a task is where you know what, the learners and the learning are the focus. So I want to end our session today. IAL has come up with 6 principles of learning design. And if you take a look at the 60 different strategies given to you, these are some practical things that you can also consider in future.